Thank you so much, Daniela. It's a true pleasure and honor to be doing this with Rattlestick. Welcome, everyone. I apologize in advance for being extremely sweaty, but between the stage fright with all the faces and the heat, we're in for a very wet phase at some point. This is Spotlight on Critics of Color, and I am so excited to have this wonderful people that I admire and love so much. And if you don't know me, I am the co-host and co-creator with the gorgeous Diep over here of Token Theater Friends podcast and web series. And we also write now. So I want each guest to introduce themselves. And who wants to start? I'm sorry, I'm already nervous. So Juan, David, or Diep?
I'll do it. I'm Juan Michael Porter II. I am the managing editor and critic in residence of BroadwayWorld Dance. I also cover dance and cultural issues for The Observer, Body, TDF Stages, Yay Raven, and Time Out. And I'm a former dancer, and I bring that to my writing. I think that movement is everything and want you to feel the same way.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is David John Chávez. I'm out in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I have a website, bayareaplays.com, and I'm also on the staff for the San Jose Mercury News and East Bay Express. I'm also the vice chair of the American Theater Critics Association and co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for ATCA. So thank you all for being here. It's super thrilling.
Yeah, David, repping at white institutions. Woo! Hi, I'm Tran. I'm also the co-founder with Jose of Token Theater Friends, which you can listen to us every single week. And I have been told that is an enjoyable experience, so good for all of you. I was until Friday employed at Broadway.com, but now I'm floating around writing things, opining, finally being able to talk trash on Broadway shows. You know, it's an interesting time that we live in.
Thank you all for joining me for this. I'm very excited to have you all here. So as journalists, we usually answer, what, how, where, when, and all of that. But I want to start by asking all of you why. Every time I meet a BIPOC critic, and I'm like, why are you, what's wrong with you? Why did you want to do this? So I would love to hear from all of you why you wanted to, become critics in the arts and theater and dance.
Oh, God. Okay, so real talk. I don't like the way that theater and dance have been written about, and I feel that no one cares about my opinion, or that my opinion about something isn't what matters. Yes, readers want to know, like, do you think it was any good? If I'm just saying, well, I didn't like it because it was the color purple, then shut up. Who cares about that? There needs to be a lot of information that's going into it. And I got to the point where I felt like, so you don't like this performance because you dislike the performer. So you're going to damn an entire show? That doesn't work for me. And I think as a person of color, what it means to me is hearing back from other people of color that, I felt that you saw me, or that you considered my culture and the impact of where I was coming from in the piece, as opposed to saying it doesn't fit your very specific lens of what it should have been. And when I am trashing a piece, something I always take into account is how the audience received it. And I'll frequently say, contrary to what I thought, the audience gave it a rave, so maybe I missed something. And I think that's important to say to the audience that I am not the authority on this piece. I just thought these things based upon X, Y, and Z.
David?
It was originally just a selfish decision on my part. I've always wanted to write, and I couldn't figure out how to get paid to do that except through journalism. And then deciding, for me, when I decide I am going to do this, like, I hyper focus on it and try to be like the best the best writer I can be doing it. And so, which means I get very critical about myself and I push myself really hard. And so when I decided I'm going to be a journalist, that meant it's like, I want to find the most compelling stories. I want to write the stories that I would want to read as a reader. And then for me, the most compelling thing about covering the arts for me has always been like seeing how people come together to like create this beautiful thing. And for me, as a person who always hated group projects, I don't quite understand theater people, because I find that the thought of working with a bunch of people for like years on end just maddening. And so I love to see like how people do that, how people build beauty from chaos, and you know, talking to artists is like a really invigorating process for me. That's why when people ask me, oh, what do you do? Like, I don't do any one thing. I talk to artists, I sometimes critique work, I sometimes podcast, but I don't really want to put like restrictions on myself, because that's not a fruitful thing. Especially as you progress in this career, you'll find that what you were doing is really boring you, and then you gotta switch over to do something different.
So wait, are you telling me there's a universe where there's like a novelist Diep? Like, what kind of books is she writing?
The novelist Diep is writing a lot of sci-fi fantasy books, probably featuring maybe bodice rippery. Things that I cannot show my parents. At least I can show my parents like my bylines, but I can never show them any of my fiction writing.
I love that. Now I want those books. David.
You know, I had a very different career. It started off with journalism. I was on a staff at a newspaper, and I was covering the city desk. So, you know, a lot of shootings and killings, things that are happening at nighttime, and breaking news. So a lot of that kind of journalism. And then I would freelance in the features department. So I was doing concert reviews and play reviews. So I had gone away from that for some time because I was a drama teacher for a long time. I was a high school drama teacher, and, you know, directing shows and running a program. It was great. But I've noticed probably in the last, you know, I've been doing this regularly since 2009, but I really noticed in the last few years, maybe in the last 5 years, where my voice was getting sought out more, as far as, you know, features, as far as reviews, as far as trying to amplify things. And for me, it took on a much greater importance in terms of trying to amplify different artists of color, to amplify different people that are doing shows. You know, you would get requests like, we don't have any, you know, BIPOC theater critics. Is there a way you can come out and see our show? Can you review our show? And if you look at, you know, just like maybe in my case, the history of Chicano theater, we're talking about a history that maybe in earnest started around 1968 with Luis Valdez and Teatro Campesino getting started out in, you know, the fields of Delano and the Great Boycott. So if you look at that history, we're talking about, you know, something that's not very old, 1968, you know, a little bit more than 50 years ago. Whereas if you look at other forms of theater, you know, you're talking about Ibsen, Strindberg, and Tennessee Williams, they have had, you know, much longer runs. So they've had much greater bases in terms of pulling from subscriber bases and giving people access to theater. And, you know, for BIPOC artists, it feels like we're still trying to catch up and trying to create our own niche to this day. So I really kind of felt like if I can help with that cause, that is probably my niche, and where I can try to contribute to, you know, to giving more voice to those people out there trying to do great work and tell stories. You know, that's a big part of it.
So I grew up in Honduras, a country, a very poor country in the developing world, and there was no criticism because there's no theater basically. And to be honest, I have no idea how the hell I decided that I wanted to be a critic, but it's the only thing that I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. So my path into criticism was, I started, you know, writing. I set up my own blog when I was a teenager. And then that led to people noticing me and inviting me to like write stories for them. And by the time that I moved to New York, I was, a professional writer. But people are often very surprised, especially when I talk to younger BIPOC, students in colleges and stuff like that right now. They're very surprised when they learn that, for instance, I never went to theater school. I never went to drama school. Like, I have no background whatsoever in drama. I went to film school, and many of you here are going to be very surprised to know that I have a degree in graphic design, because my parents were very sick of me taking too long to get a diploma. They're like, please get any diploma. So I wonder what that path was for you, and what was the thing that most maybe surprised you about, like one day you're critics, because that's what all of you are. And what was different than what people had told you, or maybe what you had imagined as you embarked on this adventure?
Wait, you have a degree in graphic design and you don't want to design our merch?
I hate graphic design. I suck at it also. So anyway.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll talk. It kind of dives into actually what David was saying about like going into this because you saw there was like a need for it. Because I didn't really go into journalism thinking anyone wants to hear what my opinion is. I went into it because I like to talk to people and I want to tell their stories. And then as I started progressing in my career, things would start happening. Like white people loved playing Asian people, but there were not a lot of Asian people writing about that really shitty phenomenon. And then I thought, maybe I should. Does anyone want to hear what I have to say? And the first leap is always the hardest, because you have to get over that doubt about that imposter syndrome about yourself, about like, who wants to hear my opinion about this? There's so many other opinions out there. And so it wasn't until like I put my first piece of critique out there, and it was on my personal blog post in like 2012. And I saw that people were responding very passionately to it, that I realized, oh, I have something here. I don't know what it is, but it feels not important, but it feels like something I should nurture. And it's been a very slow process for me of becoming really comfortable with my own voice and becoming very comfortable with sharing it. And it's all like it's all just a ploy just so that I could be more hireable. I'm just very much like, I need to get a lot of Twitter followers so that if I ever get fired, I can maybe go somewhere. I have a following, so I can go somewhere else. It's all practical thing. And how do you get a lot of Twitter followers? You get opinionated. So I learned how to become opinionated. And the other surprising thing for me is actually when I wanted to first write about the arts for a living, I thought, oh, where do they do that? Oh, the New York Times does that. I need to write for the New York Times one day. And then I didn't realize that there's a whole ecosystem of places that you can write for, places that you can work. And it's been the most surprising thing for me, is being able to build my own voice outside of the traditional media ecosystem. And that's one thing I'm really grateful for social media for.
Yeah, Diep had mentioned this, and shout out to my National Critics Institute 2020 cohort, because one of the conversations we had quite a bit over that time was the mentioning of imposter syndrome. It's something that I think writers battle all the time. Anytime, for me, even when I'm watching a show and I know I'm reviewing it, there's this anxiety that sets in pretty early on, where I'm like, oh, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? Am I going to say this with any coherence? Is anybody going to even listen to me? It's this constant battle that you face. And it's almost like this demon that you face every single time you sit in front of your computer to share your thoughts, because I don't know how many people are going to read what I'm going to write. I don't know if anybody's going to read it, but someone will. And, how am I going to make them feel if I say something that's, not good or not bad? So I carry that with me. But as far as just being a writer and an arts writer, as someone that comes into a production at a very late part of the game, you know, they had gone through 8 weeks of rehearsals and preparing everything, and then they have their big opening night, and I'm going to just come in and I'm going to have my own opinions on what I feel about it. For me, that's a challenge. It's scary, but it's also exciting, and there's a responsibility to it. And I remember reading something about how we as arts journalists have a responsibility to cover things correctly and to cover things with a certain respect and a certain honor that does not disrespect the artist. Can we dislike something? Absolutely. It happens all the time. Can we have disagreements? Can we feel like this show did not do what we were supposed to do? Yeah, all the time. We go through that all the time. But really, as long as we are trying to be as fair as we can, I think people understand that's part of our role. So for me, there's this kind of exciting piece of interacting with a work that is going to really give me a chance to explain as best as I can for the reader how I feel about something, and also holding the fact that it's only my voice. I'm one person. You know, I'm not a big, powerful person where I'm going to go in and tear something down, or, you know, the show maybe is not as great as my glowing review, and maybe it's not as bad as my worst review. But really, it's really important to, you know, every single time I sit in front of my computer, there is this fear, like, am I getting this right? Am I doing this correctly? So I completely understand about this imposter syndrome. But then as you go along, you know, maybe you have more people saying, hey, I really liked your review, or thanks for writing that story. And that's the kind of stuff that says, you know, maybe I'm not as bad as I think I am, because I think I'm horrible sometimes. But, you know, the more people that are reaching out and saying, I loved what you said, the insight you had, I didn't think about that. That's all really important stuff. And it just makes you want to get better at it as you continue interacting with more and more works.
Oh my God, I always feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. It's like the terror has not gone away yet. And every time I'm about to publish something, I'm just like, this is going to be the one that gets me canceled.
So I'm the obnoxious theater or dance critic who feels the exact opposite. I don't have imposter syndrome. I think I'm amazing and really smart. And part of that is because of my background. My sister, who's younger than I am, taught me how to write. She actually went over all my college essays and was like, oh my God, no one cares how smart you are. Stop trying to show off. And she taught me when I was 17 that it's a conversation. And I feel very comfortable speaking with people. And I think that as long as I'm leading with that, as long as I'm being sincere with that conversation, then we're good. There are so many different things to write about. Something that we focused on in our NCI cohort was the fact that you could actually review a dance performance and focus just on the costumes, and that would be legitimate. Or you could focus on a movie like The Social Network and talk about specifically the impact that Facebook has had in recent years, and that is just as viable as anything else that goes on in that movie. So I, you know, to playwrights and critics and aspirants, I say, it's okay to feel like you're a fraud, but it's also great to realize that you have a right to say what you want to say, and that anyone who disagrees with you can write what they think and go shove it.
What you said right now just reminded me of one of my favorite things that John Waters has ever said, and he was explaining to Terry Gross how he had never really seen a bad movie, because he said that if the movie wasn't particularly great, he would focus on the lamps, and then he'd be like, oh, the lamps in that movie. So I love that. Writers and obviously critics and journalists, we're always like going after that mythical, you know, voice, like finding our voice and knowing what our voice is. And sometimes it's very hard for each of us to listen to our voice in more than one way. And I wonder if you know, like, I love all your voices. Like, I could perfectly, you know, like read something without your byline and be like, oh, this is totally Juan. I wonder if you're able to, you know, identify, like, how would you define what your voice is and what you bring to the conversation about art?
I'll say what I want to bring: authority. I really want people who are reading it to, and I mean, I think that I have it because I work very hard at it, to say, like, I know what I'm talking about, and I want you to feel comfortable in reading what's being put out there. And I also want them to question that of like, he's saying this pretty boldly. Is that true? I want to go find out for myself. Like that's actually the thing I'm most proud of is that when people read a review about a show that I hated, they always say, well, now I want to see it. And that's the way it should be.
I'm gonna start calling names like a teacher.
Okay. So here's a fun fact about me. And no one looked this up. But when I was a teenager, I used to write a lot of fan fiction. and the thing about writing fan fiction is it teaches you about voice, it teaches you how to write, obviously, but also how to embody another person's voice and what makes up a person's voice, which is the way they write, how they express their ideas, how long it takes them to express their ideas, how clearly or concisely or how elaborately they do that. And it was really good practice for me as a writer and finding my own voice to realize, oh, I'm not a Tolkien I'm not a J.R.R. Tolkien when I'm writing. Like I can't just use 5 paragraphs to describe a mountain. Like that's not the kind of writer I want to be. Like I'm more of like a T.S. Or an Ernest Hemingway kind of writer, where I want to be direct, and I want people who may not have seen the show to understand what I'm saying. Because one of my, and people ask me why I don't go into academia, and like one of my big criticisms of it is the fact that it uses jargon to mask the point so that the person sounds smarter. And for me, once I realized that I can just be comfortable with writing the way that I speak and be comfortable knowing that I will still sound smart. I will still sound like I know what I'm talking about. I don't have to pretend to sound like Ben Brantley or like my lit professor. Like I can just sound like me and like that is enough. And that's taken me a really long time to get there. And it's also for like, and for me when I'm writing, it's for the people who don't know a lot about it, who like me thought, oh, this is for like people up here. Like the way they write is for people up here. Like I can't understand it. Like I don't want people to read my work and just be like, I don't know what she's talking about.
Yeah, I had a very different kind of entry into just theater in general, because when I grew up, everything around me and everything that I surrounded myself with was sports. So, you know, I was constantly reading every sports page that I can get my hands on in the Bay Area. So, you know, the people that I would read were the people that really had these amazing descriptive, you know, ways of explaining a game or a moment. And for me, that's kind of what, you know, I looked at in terms of how I like to write. The way I like to explain it for myself is I love to hate people that I feel like I'll never write like, because for me, that gives me something to strive for. So I see people like, God, I hate them because I'll never write like them, but I'm going to try. And, you know, and something that I'm so like enamored by are people that really can write essays. And it wasn't until, you know, more recently where I felt like, okay, maybe I do have something that I have to say, as opposed to being reactive with everything, whether I'm writing a feature on an actor or an artist or reviewing a show. You know, maybe I do have an opinion about something as someone that's lived, as someone that, you know, has a certain observation. So for me, I like to try to have fun in the way I write something. I try not to be snarky because I don't think that's very attractive. I think that's kind of a turnoff. But I like to try to be witty. I like to, you know, kind of show that something was fun, because that's why we go to the theater, because, you know, it's fun, it's insightful. There are times where we can go and we can have a blast, and there's other times when we walk out and we just, you know, something hits us where we live and stays with us for some time. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing about writing about theater specifically, is because you interact with so many different styles of work. It really challenges you to be very specific in every single time you write about a certain play. You know, not all plays are the same, not, you know, there's so many different styles. So you have to interact with each of those works differently. So, you know, but for me, my journalism experience as a kid was all about, I want to write the next great sports column. I want to write about the game. I want to write about the World Series. I want to write about this. So, you know, it wasn't until I got into theater way, way late in like the end of my high school term when I found something that I could really kind of dive into that kind of led to everything else. But, you know, now as a writer, I really love reading good criticism. I really love reading good arts journalism because I learned so much from that. And it just helps me want to strive further in trying to create something that is really specifically my own voice. And it's always a challenge.
You're like one of the only people that I could listen to talk about sports. Sorry, Dad. And now I'm imagining.
We're planning to go to a soccer game so you can eat and I can watch soccer.
Yes, I need the nachos. And I'm imagining like this version where you're doing like theater reviews in like that sportscaster like voice, and I want it to happen. So allow me to be earnest for just like a little second. And like Juan, every time I read something that you wrote, I want you to run for office and like rule the world. And David, like every time I read something you wrote, I am in such awe of how kind and generous you are. And Diep, it's like you are fierce. So, but you know that already. When Daniela and I started talking about putting together this conversation, that Harper's letter in which a bunch of really rich people were complaining about being afraid of being canceled was circulating. And that was like, the main topic in social media. And that's the only way that we coexist because we're all trapped home right now. So yeah. I always like, every time I hear that term cancel culture, I get like, it makes me squirm. And I wonder, I want to pose the following question to all of you. Do you even think that cancel culture is real, or what the hell is cancel culture?
I don't think cancel culture is real. I think it's a bunch of people who don't want to be held accountable for their shitty opinions. If I go out and say that we should marginalize a group of people, I will suffer the consequences for that, and I should. And I think it is just dishonest for people to, but what did I say? Freedom of speech. I'm like, yes, freedom of speech, and I have the freedom not to listen to you ever again.
I think cancel culture is like different from being bullied and being doxxed and harassed and getting death threats sent to you. I think that's very different. And I think people have used the term cancel culture in bad faith to have it to make it sound like them being held accountable for their shitty opinions is the same as, Lindy West getting death threats because she writes about being overweight. And those are not the same thing. And we need to stop thinking about it like they're the same thing. Otherwise, like, we rip apart like the nuance of what people are actually getting criticized for. And and people always like to say, oh, Facebook is infringing upon my free speech because they won't let me post about this thing. They're not a government entity, therefore they can do whatever they want. And and free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences of it. Like, if you shout bomb in a crowded theater, there will be consequences. If you advocate for harassment on social media or advocate against the marginalization of certain people on social media, there will be consequences. And people like Juan said, they talk about cancel culture because they don't want to deal with those consequences. But it is very different from people getting harassed and bullied.
Yeah, the same thing. I don't really understand the whole concept of cancel culture. As far as, if you certainly you have the right to say what you want, feel how you feel, express whatever, and I want to say shitty opinions too, so I don't want to miss out on that chance. So thank you. If you want to share your shitty opinions, that's all well and good. But you're not entitled to have me listen to it. It's not an entitlement. And that's the part that I don't fully understand. You can say what you want. I don't have to listen. You can, if you want to have a certain opinion, that doesn't mean you're entitled to have me listen to your music or read your stories or read your books. If that is, the hill you want to die on, then go ahead. That's fine. It doesn't affect my life. I just don't want to engage with it. And, maybe, and nor do you, nor do you have an entitlement to have me engage with your work. So if you want to say something and I don't want to listen to it, what's the big deal? You do you.
So like maybe, all our colleagues who write anything, maybe we should just like cancel the idea of cancel culture, because otherwise we're just helping spread something that's, a ton of shitty opinion, defending.
Well, someone just said on the chat that cancel culture is real. Woody Allen would actually be canceled, but he's not. Like, cancel culture is not actually a thing unless it's someone like Lindy West who gets actually bullied off of social media and like can't go out in public. Like that. Like, can Woody Allen go out in public? Yes. Can Roman Polanski go out in public? Yes. So let's not, we need to be very careful to not conflate the two things.
Yeah. Hi, JD. Hi, Nella. I want to talk a little bit about, I feel like one of the things that we lack as critics, as a member of critics organizations, like we celebrate the work and we celebrate theater and we celebrate the art that we cover, but we rarely celebrate each other. Like there's no such thing as like a critics group giving an award to a critic, or even like helping amplify what they're doing or like celebrate their work in any way, which is why I gave you some homework and I want each of you to talk about the piece that you are the proudest of. And I know that's a little bit probably like a Sophie's choice kind of thing, because I want everyone who's attending and everyone who's going to be watching this later to go read it and share it.
David, you want to go?
Oh God. A piece that I'm really proud of. Yeah, sure. There was one coming up. I have a piece coming up in American Theater Magazine about a theater company out in Minnesota. It's an Asian theater company, and I'm really compelled by the idea of allyship and what is a role of a theater company to be allies to another company. So that's something that's on the way. But as far as something that I was pretty proud of, I'm really proud of whenever I can do a piece on a higher level in terms of, diversity. And, I did a piece about a company out in the Bay Area that does all of their work in prisons. And so they have all this great outreach, and the lead of the piece was talking about a guy that went in to talk to a judge, and he asked the judge if he could stay in prison longer so he could finish a play that they were working on. And he just said at the top of the piece, he just talked about the fact that his entire life, he's never completed a thing. And if he's able to complete this one thing, this could be something that he can use to springboard for the rest of his life as he comes out of prison. So that was the kind of story that I thought, this is a really important piece and a huge metaphor for, giving a second chance. And this is, theater giving a second chance to an individual. So that piece, took a long time to get it to a place. So for me, I'm very proud of that piece. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to amplify a really important company in the Bay Area that's doing incredible work in our California prison system.
So I had a piece that came out yesterday, and it's actually the most important thing that I've ever written, and it's possibly the most important thing I'll ever write. It was a reported piece about sex abuse against Black boys that had gone on at Cleveland School of the Arts for decades. And, like David, I want to speak about being an advocate as a writer, especially during this time when there aren't shows going up. And I think it's important for us to use our platform and our voices to call attention to things, especially people whose lives are being terribly impacted. So I spent 2 months reporting this piece, and to hear the young men, the survivors, speak about what was done to them and how they were ignored and why they were ignored, even as the police had all this information, the school knew about it and kept hiring this man. There was a lot, like an actual case, and it continued. Afterwards, it's very gut-wrenching and horrifying. And it's exactly why I felt that I had to write about it, because no one else has or wanted to. The local news in Cleveland, I'm not going to criticize them, but I will say that I feel that our approach to this salacious story was, we need to focus on why this happened, and also not treating these survivors like our pleasure toys of like, oh, can you believe that happened? So yeah, that's the most important thing I've ever written. It's probably the most important thing I'll ever do.
Don't speak too soon, Juan, because as someone who's done that kind of reporting before, once you do one, you just kind of, it keeps going, and you end up topping yourself, which is like always a surprising thing in this business. Because when you ask like what's the thing you're proudest of, like I don't even know, because for me, like every single long form story that I do, it's always its own kind of battle of like, okay, I have this idea. How do I make this idea the most concise, persuasive, like the best piece of writing I can give, and to like touch people? And it's always like, I always feel like I'm gonna throw up every time I write and put something out, because I'm just always so nervous. And so I guess recently, the thing that I've been proudest of is the story that I really wanted to write. And I pitched it to the New York Times, and they never got back to me. And I pitched it to NBC, and because I knew someone there, and they got back to me, and I was very happy to be able to write it, because it was about like a bunch, like this volunteer group called the Anti-Sewing Squad, and they've made like now 70,000 free masks for marginalized communities, and they've been doing something that the federal government has not done for people, which is to give people actual protection. And it's all volunteer work. It's founded by a theater artist. That's how I knew about it. And it's like and it was one of those times where like, right now for me, I've been trying to figure out like what is the best, what am I useful for right now? Because like I'm sitting at home in my apartment, like what can I do to be useful to the world, aside from like trying to be like a contact tracer or be an essential worker or something. And so like writing that, it made me feel like, oh, like maybe my use continues to be like amplifying the work of people who are trying to make the world a better place, either through activism, either through their art. And so like that was part of like the impetus for continuing to create for Token Theater Friends, is wanting to just like put positivity out into the world, and to show everyone like we're not dead. Like there are still good people out there who care. And so that's like a couple weeks, but I'm really proud of that story, because I feel like it made a lot of people feel hopeful, and it got more sewers into the group and more coverage for them. And apparently they said that it was like the best article that had been written about them. So I'm very proud of myself about that.
You should also link people to the one person that you posted on Instagram who made those masks for you, because they're so beautiful and they're for sale, which is really cool. Juan, I'm really glad that you brought up advocacy, because like I feel that advocacy is one of two paths that like if I were to imagine myself as at a crossroads, we have the path of advocacy, which is what I try to do with my work. And then we have the other path, which is another thing that's a lie that critics tell themselves, and it's the idea of objectivity. There's nothing less objective than criticism, because how could it be objective, right? Who makes the criteria for that? So I would love, because it's almost time to open up for questions, and just as my stage fright is ending, the thing's also almost ending. So I would love to hear what's your take on objectivity, and how this is in many ways, I feel, more gatekeeping from the old guard and from white supremacists, basically.
I'm going to start just to say, objective to whom? Because if I spoke about being a Black person in the 50s and 60s, I would frequently, I'm sure I would have been told, oh, but that's not being objective. You need to take into the KKK's perspective. And why? They don't want me to exist. The other thing is objectivity. I taught at USC 2 weeks ago, and it's like, it's a lie. Even in reporting, we choose, our bias influences the facts that we present and how we present them. So enough of that shit.
Yeah, you can't you can't walk into a show or a piece, because everything you are, you take in there with you. You know, I'm Mexican American. I'm a Latino. I grew up in California in my 40s. A dad, you know, married. I mean, everything that I am, everything that I've experienced, everything that I've grown up with, whether it's racial injustice or, you know, things that make me happy, things that make me sad, things that affect me, everything that I have been built in my entire existence on this earth, I take with me every time I see a show. So if I see something that offends me, then I have to acknowledge that. If I see something that really makes me happy in a certain way, you know, if I'm watching a play where the characters are having menudo on a Sunday morning, I'm going to have a very different reaction to that than maybe a white critic, and that's just the way that's just the way it is. So it's you know, you're trying to interact with the work, but at the same time, it's your voice. You know, you're the critic. It's the voice that you've built up with as you've grown up in this existence, in this society where you live. So, you know, this whole idea that I have to be objective, well, not necessarily, because I have to be true to who I am, because ultimately that is what the reader is looking for. They're looking for my truth.
And I'm going to come to it from like a different perspective, because yes, to everything Juan and David said about being objective in theater criticism in criticism, op-eds in general is kind of bullshit, because it's one person's opinion. Like, there's no such thing as objectivity when it's one person's opinion. But I actually want to come at it from like the point of view of a reporter. And I've noticed this because a lot of people tell me that they feel safe when I'm talking to them, because they feel like I will take care of them. It's not something that I mean to do. It's because they're like for example, like if the sky is raining, I'm not going to like interview some dude who says the sky is not raining in the name of objectivity, which is what they teach in journalism school, which is like always interview both sides. But there are certain places where both sides is not useful to the reader. And for me, when I'm writing, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, what is the information, what is the story here that I'm trying to convey, and what is the best way to convey it. I'm not trying to be objective because that is a lie, and objectivity doesn't exist. But it's like, I'm not trying to be objective, I'm trying to be truthful. It's like I'm trying to show like what happened within this situation, why a situation is worth writing about. And I feel like when it comes to, you know, trying to work at a bigger outlet, that becomes kind of a liability, because they are a very they're still part of the old school way of thinking of, oh, you need both sides. That's why the political coverage in the New York Times is shit and will get us all killed. Because like they're willing to just print lies without substantiating it. And I feel like most journalists, they've become obsessed with this idea of objectivity and not with the idea of being truthful and serving and being helpful to the person who's reading it. Like most of the time, if I'm reading political coverage, like I don't know who to believe, because they don't have like my best interest at heart. And so like, I think it's like a bigger reckoning for journalism in general, and especially, yes, arts journalism, where based on like what you choose to cover is also part of bias as well, what you choose to see as important, who you choose to talk to. Most people still have the predisposition that if it comes from money, if it comes from a big institution, it's more important. And so there's a lot of things that editors need to interrogate, and they are not interrogating them enough, which makes my job and trying to get jobs so much harder.
Okay, thank you all. While we wait for people to enter their questions in the Q&A box that's now open, I want to ask you one last thing. And, you know, many people think I'm very delusional because I keep saying that during this pandemic and during, you know, the mess that the world is in right now, I have found that my mission and my purpose are clearer than ever. And I'm not, you know, I might be delusional, I don't know. But I wonder what, being a critic during this pandemic has, I guess, taught you, or where do you see, what excites you or what frightens you about what's next for each of you and for criticism in general?
Boom. So I'm jumping on this. A lot of people, a lot of Broadway actors, a lot of dancers have been speaking about the abuse that they've suffered for centuries, let's just be honest, and that has gone unaddressed, especially people of color. And I feel that if we weren't in this moment of pause, it could be easy to sweep those things under the table. I believe that when we come back, there's going to be greater parity, or just, we're no longer going to say that colorblind casting is the solution, because that's also like obviously making whiteness the default. And there will actually be a conversation of like, well, you say that no one cares about that storyline of a Black person living with HIV. Why do you feel that way? And maybe we should try it anyway. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I think what's really exciting is that we've obviously paused since March as far as going to theaters and seeing shows, but creative people haven't stopped being creative. And for me, that's probably the most exciting thing, as far as you have people just really actively thinking about whether it's conversations that we're having with our colleagues or conversation that we're having with our friends or things like that, where we're like, what do we want theaters to look like? What kind of equity do we need to have in these? How do we decenter whiteness so that way, the American anything is not just a certain default? How can we look to decenter that and make everybody a part of this conversation? Whereas maybe that wasn't happening before, or maybe that conversation was something that we were putting off for a later time, or maybe we were, trying to force our way into it. But I'm really inspired by artists right now. I'm really inspired by people saying, we are the storytellers. You need us. We need to be part of these conversations. We need to be part of your administrations. We need to be part of your season planning. All those types of things. All this pause is giving us a really nice base to really think about what we want to see when we come back. And it's going to be different. It has to be different. It has to change.
Thank you all. So we're going to have like 5 minutes, I think, for questions. And either all of you are very shy, or I don't know where the Q&A box is. No questions. Okay, so while we wait for questions,
well, Jose, what are you excited about? I mean, come on, we all want to hear it.
I guess the same that all of you are saying. Like I'm thrilled. Like I've never been more excited about theater than right now. I went from seeing shows every single day to a period obviously of depression and grief, because I think all of us are going through a process of grief right now. And I went from that and then to seeing just a few weeks ago, instead of seeing 2 shows on a Wednesday, I saw 3 shows. Can you imagine that? It's been so funny to me to realize how quickly I went from having nothing to do but play Animal Crossing and watch Sex and the City to having theater again, like every night, and even, like up to 4 shows sometimes a night or a day or both, which, that makes me very happy. Like I worry that I might not want to leave the house. That's important. I'm kidding. I miss being outside. Okay. I always wear pants though. So, I wear shorts, so.
The piece you're most proudest of, is it?
Oh, it's not fair. I didn't prepare, answers to my own questions. See, now my stage word's coming back. Let me think about that for a second, because I was also going to say, like, if there's any questions that you have after this, you can find me on Twitter. And even though they haven't said this, I'm assuming that all of you are invited to ask all of us questions because we're all on social media. Maybe I want to talk about that a little bit, about how, it is so important. Oh, hi, Celine. Oh. Okay, Celine is asking, what can theater companies do to lift up the voices of current BIPOC critics and or create more opportunities for entry to the field for new emerging BIPOC critics? So who wants to start? I have many thoughts about that.
you take it away.
Oh God. Okay. I feel like in all the conversations that have been going on, marketers and publicists have always come out, very unscathed, and they're responsible for many of the things that are happening right now. They are the ultimate gatekeepers in many ways. They choose who to quote. They choose what to quote. They choose who not to quote. So we have to have a very serious conversation with marketers and publicists and producers, I guess by default, about what they're doing. Because I always laugh because they have been, Diep and I have been doing our show for 2.5 years, and people call it new media, and I'm like, podcasts and videos? You mean like radio and movies that have been around for a century? That's like the opposite of new media. So, they should work harder. They should stop relying on the things that they've been doing for so long that are outdated, and because that also keeps a lot of people out, especially people from underrepresented communities. So also, there's the other thing that I personally don't believe, and please, other writers here, do not murder me for saying this, but I don't believe that criticism should only be written. I mean, writing itself is like another tool of oppression and white supremacy, and something that keeps people out. I mean, grammar itself is very stupid. So we should all embrace new media a little bit more. Do you want to talk about that?
One of the ways that I got to know you, Jose, one of the first things I ever saw from you was, in fact, not a written review, but it was this fantastic review you did about Come From Away, where you basically, the entire review was going around and talking to people and asking about nice things that people have done for them. And people just loved it. And so for me, like, showing different pathways and showing how we can incorporate all this new media, that's really exciting. But I think you were a very early example of that, a few years back. That was in 2017, I think it was. So that's how one of the first ways I got to know you.
Okay, so we have another question here. Why have arts journalists been slow to report on #MeToo and other stories of abuse? Is it because we are such a small ecosystem? What do you think?
I'm going to jump into that because my Troy Powell story, which speaks about this. So Ailey will never allow me to interview their artists again. Like, they won't. They will never allow me into that building again. And the reason why is because writers are complicit. They are afraid of being denied access, and it's cowardice.
Not just writers, and institutions are also complicit. Since I have worked for 2 publications who are very hesitant to cover harassment within the industry because it will deny them access, and also it will affect their revenue. Like when I worked at American Theater, it took us a good year to figure out how we're going to do Me Too coverage without pissing off the theaters that pay dues to the organization. And we got to a middle ground that, I'm sorry for my American Theater former colleagues who are on this call, but we got to middle ground that I don't actually think I was not happy with. And I think until there is true independence where it's not financially tied to the industry, like even the New York Times, there are stories, but somehow the New York Times has not covered them. For various, maybe it's financial reasons, I don't know. But until it's like completely independent, so that there's not a financial risk in covering it, this industry is theater's just way too close knit together to touch it.
Okay, so Daniela, you asked me to give you the 5-minute warning, and now we're over 2 minutes. We have 3 minutes left.
I'll go. Listening to people who I cover, being able to share their thoughts with people, it's really, I'm hopeful that their words will go out to the readers and inspire them. Yeah.
I'm always inspired by artists. You meet very few, if any, artists that are in this for the money. It's hard to make a career out of being a theater artist, especially if you're not in New York So, you know, with the people that I cover in the Bay Area, I run into so many artists who just want to tell stories, who want to make people happy, who want to bring joy, who want to share their artistry with the world. And I always feel like I'm honored to have the opportunity to cover it. So, you know, it's inspiring to see people who are really, you know, you hear a lot of people saying things like when we come back and when we come back, and that really kind of speaks to the resolve of artists and artistry. And, you know, those of us who love theater know that theater is an essential part. You know, every culture's strength is through the arts. And, you know, whatever art people choose, that's how we get to learn about people. So for me, that inspires me moving forward in hopes that everything will, you know, people will continue to find, you know, their voices through this whole time.
So I'll have an anecdote. So last night I was feeling very salty, and I tweeted about how much I hated Eva Van Hove's West Side Story. And then as of now, I'm almost at 1,000 likes on that tweet. And which is not to like toot my own horn. It's more like even though the industry has paused live performances for the most part, there's still hunger for people to talk about it. There's still hunger for people to read about it. And that's what's been boring me as Jose and I have ventured off by ourselves, is the fact that, oh, people want to read us, people want to talk about what it is, want to talk about like the things that we've written about, want to talk about, they still want to talk about shows. Like the appetite is still there. And I think it's because like people still want to feel connected to each other and to the art form, even if they can't see it in person. So that's what's given me hope, which is like theater Twitter is still there. We're not. The theater may be asleep, but we're not asleep. We never go to sleep. I wake up and I get additional 400 likes. I'm just like, what? Do you people ever sleep? I love you all. I love you all.
And I would say that, you know, Juan and David, I'm being earnest again, I'm sorry. Juan, David, and Diep give me hope. You know, as a BIPOC critic, I've found a sense of community with all of you and many others who, you know, I were out there and who, you know, I personally, you know, I always think of you as a family, and, you know, like we're colleagues and we're friends. And I've never ever thought of any BIPOC critic as my rival or my competitor. Like we're never like fighting to get the same things, because I'm always about like, you know, like opening doors and burning down structures if I must, to carve space for all of you. I'm also very hopeful because, you know, Daniela, like, like a few years ago, even last year, I would say something like this would have focused specifically on us not being white. And that's really boring because we don't wake up in the morning going like, oh shit, I'm not white. That's like the least, you know, no. You know, better late than never. I'm so proud that theater's finally waking up. And, you know, also all the theater and the Animal Crossing plays give me a lot of hope. So thank you, Juan, David, Diep, and Daniela. Thank you so much. You are the best. And thank you all, obviously.
Watching.